Scratch that. Let's just go ahead and get going. So, good. We have a smaller crowd here today, which is great. We can kind of open this up to a really kind of engaging kind of conversation. So, I'm going to go ahead and start with a quick introduction of who I am and what we do at Reviewer and kind of what spurred this discussion in the first place. And then we're going to come back a little bit to some of the key takeaways and goals and things that I want to cover today. And the reason why I'm doing that is I think it's a bit of a unique kind of conversation, and it's one that I had actually about 2 days ago with a potential credit union that's looking at using Reviewer, and they're a group that has never actually ran a scholarship before, and so the conversation was actually very different. It was more so, hey, we're looking at launching a scholarship, but we have kind of two really big concerns. One of which is we have no idea how to run one because we've never done it in the past. There's some concerns around, how to run it the right way, compliance, and things like that. But then also like what is like the recommended process and workflow to launch a really well established kind of scholarship program and not recreate the wheel. And so again, kind of going back to my introduction, it's a conversation that we have quite a bit. So to introduce myself, my name is Kyle. I'm the CEO here at Reviewer. We started the company over 10 years ago, and we actually did so from our own firsthand experience in these types of campaigns, what I call kind of investment review programs. So going back 10 years from now, we were part of the review committees. We actually had at that point hundreds and hundreds of binders being mailed to us. And we were tasked with handwriting notes and feedback and scores and trying to kind of deliberate with other committee members to ultimately select the recipients. And so as you can imagine, being that these are very paper-based processes, which absolutely would not fly here today, just with the modern applicant and the modern consumer, it was extremely time-consuming and overwhelming. With that said, there was kind of one nice benefit to it, and it was centralized, right? You had a binder and it had everything you needed. The challenge is it was a binder. And so where the challenges really kind of came into play, and that's kind of what spurred today's discussion, was kind of the introduction of technology and tools. And today's goal and the webinar topic is how to create a very modern and engaging scholarship program as a credit union. And so we think, okay, well, if we're using technology and online tools, that typically implies that this is modern. And I hate to break it to you, but things like spreadsheets and emails and downloading of documents and using Google Drive, having built web forms on your website isn't actually modern. Yes, you absolutely are using online tools. The challenge is none of these tools are intended for the task at hand. So one thing that starts happening and things that we actually saw, firsthand experience from some of our clients is, you have a bunch of applicants who are sending you an email with their submission form, or maybe it's their transcripts are coming in from the transcript office, or maybe you're having a reference get emailed to you. Is now you have to download it, you have to export it, you have to recompile it, and there's information that's getting lost. Worst case situation, we actually see these applications go to spam filters. And so you sit down as a review committee. Now we're concerned about, are we even reviewing all of the candidates and awarding funds, or the people who never even got included in the review because they're sitting in a spam filter? On the total flip side of things is that we're all very community driven organizations. Oftentimes that may mean that we know who the applicants are, we may know who their parents are. And so how do we not let that cloudy our judgment as a review committee? How do we redact the data? How do we keep it very fair and compliant? And again, trying to be modern and using all these tools that actually created more challenges for us in trying to attempt to solve that. And so again, that's kind of what brings us back to our background, as well as kind of full circle to today's conversation is, reviewers being used by thousands of organizations to run these types of campaigns, very much in highly regulated industries like healthcare, as well as in credit unions, but also, within major Ivy League university system, membership-based associations. And so when I say I've seen every imaginable scholarship process and workflow, I really have. I used to say there's no right or wrong way of running these programs, but to be fair, there absolutely are wrong ways of doing it, but there's also a lot of really right ways. And that's what I want to kind of talk through here today is like, what is the right way to run a scholarship program that's very modern, very engaging, but also protects the house and keeps things very, very compliant. So I'll use kind of this information here on my screen. We'll kind of run through a couple key bullet points, but at the end of the day, I really want to dive into Reviewer, not necessarily to showcase our platform, although behind the scenes, of course, you're going to see it in action, but more so to kind of visualize like what does this concept look like in theory, that we can kind of take these concepts and apply to you guys. So I guarantee there's some components that we're going to kind of run through that you may never have seen before when it comes to running a scholarship. And so again, with our background working with membership-based associations, it actually is very, very similar, obviously, to you guys as credit unions with members. let's just be very, very transparent here. One of the core challenges that we're running into is how do we kind of hook and engage and attract and retain a very young demographic member, right? It's vital for the sustainability of the credit union as an association. And that starts now. That's kind of the main premise behind why we're offering scholarships in the first place, right? Getting net new accounts at a younger demographic, working through financial literacy. Obviously, we're funding the scholarship through their accounts, and it's going to keep them into the system, things like that, right? And so we have to set these expectations that for targeting 16, 17, 18-year-olds, like what is the modern experience look like for them? And this is going to be kind of a crazy thing, but we actually have found that it's a deterrent from applicants to fill out online PDFs or download documents or physically mail it back in. Like that modern consumer is going to see that experience, and two things happen. One is it's not the modern online infrastructure that they're very much accustomed to using. And two is they have some serious concerns around data privacy, and rightfully so. I mean, it's all over the media nowadays. Where is my information going? How's it going to be stored? If I'm going to send you, say, for example, like a FAFSA document for financial needs, or if I'm going to send you my social security number, which we probably don't recommend, where's that going to live, right? And so ideally behind the scenes with Reviewer, we can help alleviate some of those concerns. So again, not me just kind of talking at you for 30 minutes. I do want to kind of showcase like what does this look like. And I'm going to focus on kind of 4 key experiences. The first of which is the submission process. And then we're going to kind of get into like how do you create these review and selection workflows? Because when I talk about like a modern process, it has to be thought about from 2 or really 3 perspectives. One is like the front-facing consumer perspective as you're applying for a scholarship. Also internally, right? We're always about trying to create efficiencies in operations. Many of you on this call may be part of marketing departments or your education units, and you're not in charge of running scholarships full time. So how do we create efficiencies? And then the third piece, which is equally, if not the most important, is also the review selection committee's experience as well. So with all that said, let's start to kind of jump through a couple kind of theories and ideas here. So the first of which is going to be the online submission experience. And again, I use the term online loosely because sending emails is online, filling out online forms is online. What I really mean, and this is where we're going to get into Reviewer, is like an actual profile-centric submission experience where the applicants come in, they create a profile, they load it up with all of their content, their deliverables, they can save, they can log out, they can come back later. They're engaging with the process. They're not just submitting one directional data, right? And so I think the main goal here has to be to lower the barrier, right? We have to make this process as simple as possible for the applicants. For many of them, they're life-changing opportunities. And so how do we kind of equip them for success so they can focus on their content creation and building the best version of themselves that sets them up for a strong review, and less so being concerned about how do I send my deliverables to you? Is it going to go to you? Am I going to lose information? I'm based here in Lincoln, Nebraska. So if I have a storm roll through, am I going to have the power knocked out and lose my hard work? And so again, we have to kind of think that through. And so generally speaking, we have to lower the barriers. So think through like what is the most simple application structure you can provide to them that still equips your team with the data that you need for informed review and selection processes. Now we're going to kind of get into what this looks like. But I think that there are probably 4 key components that I would highly recommend incorporating into your scholarship, because at this point in time, a large number of applicants these days have good grades, right? So like online grades or your GPA or even like your ACT, SAT scores may not be like the best reflection of the most deserving candidates. Now, should you collect that? Absolutely. But on top of that, how do you kind of differentiate one candidate from the next? And that's when you get into like their community impact, right? We're all mission-driven organizations, we're all community-minded. So what is that applicant doing within their community from a volunteer perspective? Tell us more about their clubs and their honors, their extracurriculars. On top of that, let's give them a voice, right? So essay prompts, how do we kind of allow them to tell a story about themselves that helps them differentiate themselves from other candidates? We talk about like a modern process. Maybe you want to leverage video essays as a way that's a really personal touch point. We can kind of explore that. I like to look at references. So for example, again, you can have the applicant build out these essays, and they can kind of tell personal impacts and these personal stories. But what better way of getting the information than from somebody else, right? So the references, so it's a whole nother challenge we'll kind of get into. And then the last thing we can kind of look at might be financial needs. Obviously, financial needs is a very gray area. Just because your family may be at high earners does not necessarily mean that you're not in need of financial assistance. And so we'll kind of look at what that could look like as well. And then again, we're going to come back to those references again. I think references are an incredibly powerful asset. However, they can be quite challenging to collect in a very modern and engaging manner. So with all that said, like what does a very modern submission process look like, powered by a reviewer, but also just in general, what do these components look like that you can hopefully incorporate into your programs as early as today? So jumping into our system, everything does start with what I call a microsite. So the majority of our clients will use their existing websites just from a content and from a marketing and from a branding perspective. It makes total sense. Let's leverage your brand. And then on there, they say, hey, click here to link or click here to apply. And that's what sends it from their web presence to reviewer. Many of our clients do like using what I call a landing page or a microsite. Again, it does kind of build kind of that middleman between your web presence and then the portal. But the main goal here, again, this is where the modern process starts, is that profile concept. So applicants come in, they put in who they are, and we can do things like single sign-on as well. There's already like membership ID numbers, but the goal here moving parts to a scholarship. You have people, you have submission forms, you've got references, you've got file uploads, you've got communication, you've got judging and scoring. That list goes on and on. And you can't have a program that has that disconnected, right? You can't be doing some things online, some things manual. You can't be using spreadsheets, and then emails, then online forms. You have to have that entire process somehow intertwined and connected. So we solve that challenge through a reviewer by having a concept called a profile. So the applicant comes in, they tell us who they are. From there, it drops them into the submission experience. However, this is kind of that first step that makes up the overarching kind of scholarship profile. So all the other components that I mentioned actually in real time get consolidated for you into one centralized hub. I do want to kind of pause here on this page. This is more like a public statement, kind of setting the expectations of the scholarship. I would actually rework this and call this a proof of process. So again, it's very common for applicants to want to know more about like where's their data going to be stored, what like if I'm applying to a scholarship, how do I ensure that I'm going to be treated fairly and be reviewed the same as my peers? So I love to incorporate a concept called a process where you kind of just outline, hey, here's what the dates and deadlines look like. Here's what the submission process will look like. Your data is going to be redacted. We're going to randomly distribute your submission to our team. They won't know who you are. We're going to be using a scoring rubric. There's going to be 2 phases of review and then an interview. Those are all kind of examples you can kind of incorporate. Obviously, those that don't do those components, just remove that. But some type of public statement that says, hey, look, when you apply for our scholarship, here's the process that we're going to go through to help kind of alleviate their concerns. Then ideally you have a tool like Reviewer that actually kind of follows that process. That way, if you ever needed to kind of show proof of it, you definitely had that ammunition in your quiver to kind of go back and do it. So from here, applicants will then kind of proceed onto the form. So again, when I talk about like a modern application experience, what I really mean is creating like a personalized experience. And so, many of you might offer multiple different types of scholarships. I love eligibility criteria where the applicants will put in information and then the system would say, hey, you can either proceed on or you can't. That way you're not wasting people's time. Or, we have one organization we work with that does a large number of scholarships, and some of them are so hyper focused on, I want to go to this specific school for this certain career path. And so the system would say, hey, based on what you just put in, here's the scholarships that you actually best align with, which are all of them do want to apply for. And then from there, we're actually creating very custom applications. So again, that may not be relevant to many of you, but I'm trying to just kind of showcase that the more personalized the experience can be for the consumer, the better. In this example, we're basically using it as a conversion opportunity. So it's asking you, hey, are you or your parents members of the credit union? If so, who are they? Move on. If not, we have to get them to your membership team so we can get them kind of signed up first and then get them back into the system. So it's a way for you to kind of target it and open up new accounts. So from here, we drop into the form. Pretty straightforward, asking for more information about who the applicant is. Again, we do want to know like what your account number is that we can kind of verify that you really are a credit union member. We're going to get into like who are your parents, how did you hear about us from a marketing perspective, all that kind of fun stuff. Again, I talked about the modern experience. It seems like a very small thing, but there's the save and log out function. Again, we can't expect the applicants to sit down at one time and do this. We want them to be able to save, log out, come back later. On that same note, if you guys are marketers, you want to track conversion rates. So you definitely want to know how many people have started these processes, who they are, how far they made it, send them built-in reminder messages. Most of our clients see about a 30% increase in volume just off of that alone. It's human nature to wait to the last minute and procrastinate. And obviously procrastination oftentimes leads to incomplete submissions. So now that we know what our dates are and who these people are, we can actually send them emails as a way to kind of convert them and not have that kind of drop off. Again, the way that I structure scholarships, I want to know more about like, hey, where are you currently going to school? Tell us more about some of your academic achievements. Where do you want to go to school? And if you are trying to tie in things like financial aid, I'm going to come back to that here in a minute. You kind of want to know what are the funds going to be utilized for to kind of help justify who actually is in financial need and not. So in this example, we're talking more about, again, what's your school, what's your current GPA. I talked a little bit beforehand about giving the applicants a voice. How do you help them differentiate themselves from one another? Because again, at this point in time, everybody gets great grades. Everybody's like a 4.25, it feels like. So with that said, we're asking for the applicants to tell us more about like their academic achievements, very specifically, like how does this maybe translate to you as a person? We get into like volunteer opportunities. So how are you impacting your local community? We even have some of our clients will ask them for actual volunteer hours, and there's like calculations that will actually assign point values and actually start to rank your candidates based off of those volunteer hours as well. From here, we start to get into essay prompts. So again, there is no better way for you guys to give your applicants a voice to differentiate themselves than essays. Now, the challenge here is that you don't want to have like an open-ended essay that says talk about whatever you want, because that way when you go to do a review, it's very, very hard to compare apples to apples. So you want to give them essay prompts. Generally speaking, these prompts should align with the mission and vision of your credit union. You don't need to overwhelm people, right? You don't need to ask them for 15 essays. Like, what are the 2 to 4 essay prompts you want them to answer? And then again, I generally would avoid having them submit that as a file upload, although you definitely can. But again, I want to make sure I lower the barrier. So by having them fill it out directly in the system, they can save, they can log back. You can physically see their work in progress as they're working on it. And then kind of a little bonus item here today that I wasn't planning on getting into is welcome to almost 2025, where every single applicant and consumer has access to AI. So how do you avoid people from literally taking this essay prompt, copying and pasting it into ChatGPT, coming back into a system like this, and then just pasting it back? Now, do I think that they're going to use AI to help write these? Absolutely. Is that a problem? Probably not. And it's going to become a more common thing. But there's a very big difference between people using ChatGPT to create a framework of an essay to help the applicants excel, opposed to writing it for them. So here in the next coming soon, Reviewer is launching an AI detection tool that will actually kind of flag these essays for you that says, hey, look, not only do we think that they used AI, but to what extent, right? Like 5% versus 100%. Do we care about 5%? Probably not. Do we care about 100%? Yeah, totally. So I'll kind of leave it at that. But again, you don't want to talk about like a modern process. Like it doesn't get more modern than that. Kind of moving on, it gets into things like the file upload. So again, transcripts, references, these are very common components to a scholarship. I talked about creating a very personalized experience. So why don't you ask the applicants, like, how do you want to submit these, either directly from you yourself, or maybe you want it to come directly from the transcript. And if that is the case, we actually have a really cool component that will notify the transcript office. They will then have a link that they can click on, upload the transcripts, and then it gets attached actually back to the applicant's profile. We're going to come back to that. In a similar sense, we also have the same kind of concept for our reference. I am going to come back to that here in just a second. The last thing I want to kind of note on is file upload. So there's a wide variety of files that you might be collecting. You might be collecting headshots from a marketing perspective. Maybe you do want to leverage video essays. Again, instead of saying, hey, answer these 3 essay prompts, you might say, hey, in a 3 to 5 minute video, record yourself talking about these. So again, collecting files isn't hard, but being able to do something with them is. You totally cannot expect your applicants to go and try to figure out a way to make them smaller file sizes, because they can't send you an email that's larger than XYZ file size. So obviously having a platform that allows you to take in large files is critical, but also on the back end, the ability to actually physically watch those videos or look at those photos and not to worry about downloading and exporting and losing information is also going to be critical. I'm going to show you this here in a moment, but just going to keep that in mind. So going back to the references, this is a totally different example client of ours, but I do have a kind of an example for us. So again, it doesn't get much more modern than this. So applicants will put in like the name and email of who is writing the reference, and then what happens is it actually triggers an email notification that says, "Dear reference, you've been asked to write a reference on behalf of Kyle, click here to do so. Now, this is where kind of best practices and emerging trends come into play. Is generally speaking, reference letters are not great. And the reason why is that oftentimes the letter is more of a reflection of the person writing it and not so who they're writing it about. I love my wife to death, but if she wrote a reference on behalf of me, it'd be so much better just because she's a better writer than I am. It doesn't mean that she loves me more, maybe it does, but she's just a better writer than I am. And that's not fair to me as the applicant. So how do we combat that? At the same time, writing a reference totally is a barrier. These people are being asked at the very last minute to sit down from scratch and write something. And many times they're just going to repurpose a prior reference they wrote. So what do you do? So in Reviewer, when they click on that link, you can totally still have them upload a letter, but instead treat this like an essay. So you ask the applicant, you ask the reference to, instead of saying, hey, go write an open-ended letter, instead answer these questions. Now, this example, they're actually asking the reference to rank the applicant on a series of qualities that align with, in this case, like the credit union's mission and vision. But what you could instead do is say, hey, reference, answer these 3 questions about the applicant. And again, it's almost like a little mini essay for them. So it lowers the barrier because they're simply coming in and they're answering the questions that sit in front of them. Now, again, I'm a marketer, right? So I'm all about conversion metrics. So what you guys get to do at that point, so once this gets submitted, it actually gets automatically attached back to the applicant's profile, which we'll come back to. But from a marketing perspective, it actually shows you like how many outstanding references have been requested. Are they done or are they not done? You can have automated email reminders go to the reference, that way you can ensure that they come through, but then also to create a really good experience for your applicants, it'll tell your applicants, hey, your references are not done yet. The applicants can track their own progress. They can't physically see the contents of the reference. That we can keep things very, very private, but it does put the pressure back on the applicant to go ahead and make sure that they can send their own reminders and their own follow-up. So again, technologically speaking, we're taking these really we're taking an ideal experience and we're leveraging technology to make it realistic and very efficient, but also kind of gives everybody the experience that they kind of desire within these processes, very, very kind of modern, online, etc. So with all that said, I want to kind of just keep moving along here to more of the backend infrastructure, because I just presented a significant number of challenges to you guys, right? How do you access the files? Now you've got all these profiles, like what do we do with them? And so I'm kind of jump ahead. I'm going to answer a couple slides here together, and then we're going to go back to reviewers. So talked about the modern experience. I think it should be pretty clear at this point from an applicant's perspective how modern and kind of engaging that is, but they're a third of the puzzle, right? Your team, operationally speaking, and then your review committee are 75% of the program, if not more. So what does that look like? So first and foremost, we have to ensure data security and privacy, right? Like let's just cut around the red tape. You're a very regulated industry. And so Reviewer is a SOC 2 Type 2 compliant company. Just keep in mind that no matter what process you use, you have to have the entire scholarship end to end in one hub, because anytime you start to export and have manual manipulation of data, anytime you're sending things through email, you lose a lot of that stuff, right? And we just basically can't be taking highly sensitive scholarship financial information and transmitting it in these unsecure ways, right? You can't give your review team like a folder with a bunch of highly sensitive file uploads that are going to store on their own hard drive. So again, I'll just leave it at that, but it's absolutely critical that we have data security at the forefront of this conversation. Now, from an experience perspective, I think there's 3 things we talk about. So number one, and again, this is going to be somewhat on my screen, but I'm at this point kind of just loosely rambling about this. I can't tell, very, very passionate about this subject. Again, I've been doing this for many, many years, and my ultimate goal here is how do we make sure that the quality candidates get the eyes and the experience that they deserve. And again, I saw very incompliant, if that's a word, non-compliant scholarships, and I don't want to see that ever happen again. So from an operation perspective, like again, you guys have a lot of hats that you wear, and running scholarships probably isn't your main one. So how do I help you on a Wednesday night at 9 p.m. not be downloading PDFs and playing around with your emails and spreadsheets? So how do we create like this online ecosystem that has all the tools that you need to run the program, but then on the back end from a review team perspective, ensure it's a very fair, non-biased process? So step number one is you have to create these review buckets, right? You got to take your scholarship applicants and give them to your team at its bare minimum. And so how do you do that? So one thing that we've kind of learned over the years, and this is a kind of a shocking number, is that generally speaking, a review team looking at scholarship applicants can't look at roughly more than 15 submissions, right? After 15, their energy levels drop off pretty dramatically. And so if that's the case, how do you take your submissions and then bifurcate them into more bite-sized buckets or bite-sized pieces? That way they're not being reviewed too many times. So for me, I think you can do that a couple different ways. I've seen review pods. So you kind of create these teams of people. Each team or pod is in charge of reviewing a certain number of submissions. I've seen it done by types of scholarships. But I think what's most relevant to you guys is randomization. Again, not only do I want to create kind of pods and teams, that way they're not reviewing too many submissions, while at the same time ensuring that the applicants reviewed enough times. But also I want to make sure that I don't have any manipulation of who's going to be reviewing who. So using randomization, basically, I can ensure that I'm not pairing somebody up with like a friend and family. Now, at the same time, you have to redact data. That is, if you think that something might be considered PII or personal identifying information, consider it so, right? Err on the side of caution. We should not be showing your review team anything about who they are, their address, their parents' information, their account numbers, demographic information, ethnicity, race. None of that should be visible to the review team. We are taking a scholarship applicant and we are giving it to a review team to make a decision off of the merits of the form, not who they are. So if there's any way that they can tie back that submission form to the person, then that's a problem. And then we'll kind of get into scorecarding here in just a second. So again, the idea is to create these buckets and these review processes. And the last piece to that puzzle is when you go to actually conduct a review, how do you want your review team to make selections? Again, I can't have review committee members knowing who the applicants are. I also can't have a very kind of subjective review process, right? If I have a 10-person team that's in charge of reviewing these scholarship applications, all 10 people have to have structure and look at the applications through the same lens. Now, again, they're all going to have their own different opinions on how to score things, but they have to have some type of formal scoring rubric that they fill out that kind of keeps them on track and kind of sets expectations. So the idea is that the review team comes in, they fill out a series of scorecard questions. It's all mathematic based, right? Data is data. So while the data may not tell the whole story, you may still leverage like deliberation meetings in these committees. They start the process by having like a ranking system that says, look, based off of the raw data and the score sheets that were filled out, here's the highest rated applicants. And then from there, allow the review team to deliberate and kind of do their own kind of subjective on top of that. But we have to start to leverage data to make these informed decisions off of. The last thing I want to talk about before I then show you all this, and again, we'll kind of move pretty quickly through that. That way we have time for Q&A, is normalizing results. So again, talk about a modern emerging trend. If you do a random distribution of submissions to a team, what happens if some of your review committee members or your staff members are just on average harsher than others? Is that fair to the applicant? Probably not. So how do you identify which of your judges are scoring higher or lower than average and take that into consideration? So again, with all that said, let's visually look at that. And I kind of combined a bunch of slides into one because I'm a more visual learner. I want to kind of show this. So operationally speaking, we'll just stay here for the sake of it. You get these dashboards. So again, I can't have you go into your email, downloading, exporting. You can't be going to online forums, downloading and exporting. You have to have a centralized, what I call command center dedicated to scholarship management, full life cycle, end to end. We're not going to get into it today because I don't want to overwhelm you, but we also are not going to talk about what happens if you are selected for a scholarship. Like, do you want the applicants to come back and submit additional deliverables? Headshots for marketing purposes, fund disbursement forms, ongoing metrics. That's a whole separate conversation, but you have to have a tool in place for that. So from your dashboard's perspective, it's going to show you how many days are remaining until your deadlines, how many entries you've received. You can send them built-in reminder messages. I already talked about how if you have external references or transcripts, are they done or are they not done? You can kind of target them more. If you want to kind of modify our dates and your deadlines, you kind of pre-plot out like the entire life cycle of the program, and then we can kind of jump in each milestone as they go. If your review team is collaborating with one another, you have to be able to visually kind of keep an eye on what's going on. So all of that shows up on your dashboard. What I wanted to do though, kind of quickly, is preview the profile concept. So I started this entire conversation by saying there's a lot of moving parts to a scholarship, and it's absolutely critical to take all those moving parts and kind of centralize them. And so again, reviewers profile centric. So what you can do is you can sort and filter this menu, and it shows you literally a list of all of your scholarship applicants. From here, you simply find them and you open them up. And going back to our roots, again, I mentioned I loved the idea of a binder. I just hated the physical nature of it. So what we've done here is we've basically taken that binder concept and we virtualized it. So I have Michael. Michael is a scholarship applicant. And I can see here, here's all the content and deliverables we collected from Michael. I have his information. I have family information. I have the grades. I do have, in this case, financial need information. So it's going to tell me where Michael wants to go to school, what the expenses are, family income. This is leveraging both IRS 1040s as well as the FAFSA SAI calculation. Again, not going to get into that now. We can save that for Q&A. Whenever we get into addressing family financial need, it's not black and white. And so we have to be able to incorporate multiple data points to be able to help build a better story and picture around that. From here, we get into things like your essays. Again, I love this because a couple things. Number one, there's a headshot, there's a video essay, there's also a resume. So a lot going on here. So in Reviewer, we actually have, again, a profile. So off to the right, I can one-to-one directly communicate with my applicants. I can log internal notes and I can kind of collaborate with my team about them. I can jump up to the attachment section I mentioned beforehand. I don't want you downloading and exporting anything. So in our system, you can see a list of, in this case, 6 different file uploads, a wide variety of files. I want to create consistency. I don't care if you're on a tablet, a Mac, or a PC. I don't care if it's a PDF or a PowerPoint or a Excel spreadsheet. You should be able to view everything. So if I press the view icon next to the file, you'll notice that it does embed itself right in front of me. So I can kind of read through resumes. I can watch a video. Again, if this was a video essay, I could physically watch it in Reviewer. That's obviously a headshot. Here's your financial need information. Here's your 1040 documents. Again, I can kind of just scroll through everything. I mentioned earlier on references. So as well as transcripts. Here's how that works. So in this example, when I filled out my application form, I asked for 2 references, one from Steve and one from Paula. I also asked my friend Tom Jerry to submit a transcript on my behalf. So you can see there's a line item for each one of those. And then when I click the view button next to it, in this case, here's my reference, it actually shows me the content that was submitted. So I have Michael, the scholarship applicant's profile, and it holds onto my information, holds onto my file uploads, holds on my references, holds onto my transcripts, and it holds onto all the communication. It doesn't get more tidy than that. So the last 2 kind of components here, your review processes. So again, I talked earlier on about how I love random review. I can get too deep into the weeds of how to configure reviewer. That's not the goal for today. But basically what happens here is we have a bucketing system. So if you ever wanted to create kind of teams or pods of review members, you basically will build a bucket. You drop a bunch of submissions into a bucket, and then you assign it out to a team. So whenever Simon, Paula, and Mark come into reviewer, they basically only will see that bucket. So maybe it's like your executive committee or board's final selections. Maybe it's like a phase 1 review, interview phase, final selection. You might have dedicated teams in charge of each one of them, but also different selection criteria as well. Why this is really cool is if I open my buckets up, it actually shows me 2 things. One is a list of all of my applicants, so Barney, Gabrielle, Gilligan, as well as my review committee. So what you can do from a compliance perspective is you can literally type in, give every applicant to 3 reviewers. They should be scored no more and no less than 3 times. But also don't allow my review team to score more than 15 people. So you literally will type those numbers into the system. It will then just start to randomly and equally distribute that out. So you can see here that whenever Barbara comes into reviewer, she's going to read Gabrielle, Leslie, and Richard's application. Damon's going to read Gabrielle and Gilligan. If you ever wanted to override this, you can also then one-to-one manually pair up your staff with your submission. So if there's ever a case where a committee member has to recuse themselves, or if they go on vacation, they can't finish things up, you can reassign it back. So again, we kind of created these buckets that pair up your applicants with your team. Now here's the critical component to this. A, we have to redact data. And B, what do you do for reviews? So when your review team comes in, they get this menu. Kind of jump ahead here a little bit. If you are redacting data, which I highly recommend, it just doesn't show their name. So it's all like ID numbers, and they simply will open up the profile. Now, again, here's kind of where the beauty is. And again, hopefully, again, I want to reiterate, it doesn't get more modern than this, right? Where you have a dedicated portal where the review team can kind of side by side view the applicant's profile, which is, as you can see here, redacted. So I have no idea who they are. I have no idea their demographic details. But I can read through their application form. I can read their essays. I can see their parent parents' financial information as well as kind of their financial needs. You can control all this. And then off to the right is my selection tool. So as far as the selection tool goes, I mentioned beforehand, there should be some type of mathematical rubric that guides your team through a series of principles, right? We want them to all have the same experience. They're all scoring them on 6 to 7 different questions. Personally, I don't love giving my judges or my team points. So for example, in this case, like rank this on a scale from 0 to 20. Not my biggest fan of that. What I would instead do is try to elicit an emotional response from your committees. So like from, this is going to sound bad, but from like good, great to ugly, or from below average to exemplary, rank this candidate's financial needs. Or, rank this person's leadership abilities from below average to above average. Again, you don't have to use that verbiage, but the review team simply reads through side by side the form. They can jump up here, they can look at file uploads, so they could actually physically view, like say, for example, a video essay. They can jump over to the references while still side by side answering those scores, and all they're doing is emotionally answering it. I feel above average, below average, good, great, ugly, sad face, smiley face, thumbs up, thumbs down. It's completely customizable, but behind the scenes, it does allocate points. So it keeps the review team highly on track. They just simply kind of review things, and then once they're done, it actually kicks out a leaderboard. So you and your team can actually physically see, based off of the raw metrics, each scholarship applicant rated from high to low. It shows you who reviewed them, collective scores, individual scores, and averages. And then from here, maybe you want to take like your top 20 people and then move them to phase 2, which is an interview. You would just simply bulk select them, move them to interview, or again, you might have a different score sheet that's being utilized, a very dedicated interview team that's different than the first round of review, all that kind of fun stuff. So for many of our clients, they leverage this for their decision-making process. They might literally say, okay, we're going to give out 3 scholarships. It's going to go to Jordan, Sheldon, and Richard. They're the highest 3 rated applicants. If you want to get a bit more complex, though, you can start to do things like this. You might say, okay, well, I want to give it to my top 3, and I'm actually looking at Gabrielle here. And by all metrics, it's a really good score, right? Like a 27, a 24, a 25. But Robert gave it a 13. That score in itself is what's preventing Gabrielle from receiving a scholarship. So we have to keep an eye on that. So why is that? Did Randy just score? Sorry, did Robert just score this low because it was a poor application? Or maybe Robert on average has never given more than a 15. So in theory, Robert scored Gabrielle really, really well. But in comparison to, say, Lori here, it's not. And it's penalizing the applicant. So this is the last thing I'm going to show you is we have this really cool tool that will basically show, I'm going to jump ahead here. It shows you a list of every applicant, how they are scored by each individual judge on a per question basis. But what you really care about is this green line, and that shows you judging trends. So it shows you on average, this is actually a real client of ours. They asked the question, this is redacted data. Why is it that anybody that Judge Judy scores never gets selected? Well, it's because as you can see here, she scores on average about a 24. But we've got Tony over here who on average scores about a 34. So there's a full 10-point swing there. So now that we know that, this report in real time automatically changes the results. And it basically creates a baseline. So if you got scored, say, for example, a 34 by Tony, it's now a 1. That means you were scored completely average. If you were scored a 37, you're like a 1.1. If you were scored a 28, you're like a 0.92. I'm making up numbers. So when you go to generate the results, your winners look a little goofy. It would say, hey, here's our highest rated applicant, it's Bruce, because collectively Bruce scores about 1.15 times higher than the collective average, whereas Elon here is a 0.83, which is almost a 10 or 20% lower than the collective average. So again, really modern tools here to kind of help you not only select the most qualified candidates, but also start to identify and call out judging trends and things that might be actually having a negative impact on your programs. So with all that said, I usually like to give ourselves, 15 minutes for Q&A. I'm right on pace. I'm going to go ahead and jump back over here. But if you have any questions or comments or insights or anything at all that I can talk about, now's your chance to ask away. Yeah, so a question that came in that says their scholarship program funds students at specific schools. So great question. Yes, it supports that. There's a lot of models around how to structure it. So a lot of times the examples that I've seen where you'll have a question right within the submission process that says select your school. That way you can build an eligibility. So if you don't support that school, they can't proceed on. So that's number one. We also have some geomapping tools that might be beneficial in case the applicants aren't sure what school to select, although I don't know if that's really a possible use case. So number one, applicant selects the school, and then from there you can kind of go through your normal review decision-making process. However, one of the models I have seen is you may limit the number of scholarship recipients per school. So you actually create this really cool automation that you'll basically appoint like a liaison at a per school basis. It could be like a principal or a superintendent or a guidance counselor. It could be anybody, right? And what could happen is all of the submissions from, say, for example, school number one go to a bucket called school number one. And then you have that main point of contact who's in charge of reviewing all the applications within their own school. They may go through like an approval process or a review process. They may ensure data accuracy, and then they either greenlight it to proceed on to the review process, or they may actually conduct a review in itself and select their top three for you, or they may just do their own selections and then tell you who their selected applicants are. So there's a lot of models around that. I've seen like signature teacher approval forms. You can kind of route them to the right people. So that's kind of where the workflows come into play. But yeah, two things. Yeah, colleges similar, right? Yeah. So that's also where maybe like the drop down of the school is more important. So they'll pick from a drop down what college they're going to apply to, and then from there kind of go and route them through the appropriate review process. Again, sometimes it has a main point of contact at the school. Other times you're doing a review and selections on their behalf. But yeah, you basically have to create those automations that will target the student and drop them into where bucket they belong into. I don't know why I'm thinking about Arizona State, but you have like Arizona State, you have ASU, you have the Sun Devils, and you can't ask an applicant to tell us what school they're applying for because it might be like 6 or 7 different ways of saying it. So you have to create structure that automatically routes them to where they. And on the back end too, you have a labeling function. So again, if you are the ones who are doing the entire review and selection process and you want to kind of control, we don't want every one of our scholarship recipients going to the same school. You want to kind of have an even distribution potentially. It allows you to have really clear visibility of how many people have been selected on a per school basis. And then to your point, the college can absolutely still review within the platform. So going back to this example, that's where that bucketing concept comes into play. So you might have, I'm going to just use simple math. I too have not had enough caffeine yet. So you might have 10 different colleges, universities. Each one of them will be a bucket. And so, for example, maybe Sally, Sue, and Steve are the main points of contact from Arizona State. So when they log into reviewer, they're only seeing the students who are applying to Arizona State. They won't see Arizona. And then from there, again, they can actually collaborate. They can go through the review and selection process. It's hyper-focused that way. Contact information by now. But if not, we'll send over that follow-up resource. Again, whatever I can do for you, please don't hesitate. I love to be a resource. So really appreciate your time today and look forward to the next webinar next month.